Welcome into the first of our conference tournament previews. We're going to preview all of the, six major conferences: ACC, Big 12, SEC, Big 10, Big East, Mountain West. Starting off with this one, the ACC, as this is the first tournament to start. This one starts on Tuesday. With a few first round games. A bunch of teams get a bye in this league. A couple or four teams get a double bye. So we're going to preview this tournament, talk through the first round matchups, and then some potential matchups that we could maybe see later in the tournament. Talk through some favorable paths, dark horse contenders for this, and then we're going to go through our predictions. Cody and I both filled out a bracket. Then we'll talk about how many teams we think get in from each of these conferences. So exciting though, regular season wrapped up for most everyone today. Conference tournaments now in full force with a few teams that have already punched their tickets, but pretty exciting time.
Yeah, definitely exciting. Regular season kind of flew by, but definitely excited for this time of year. Obviously, the ACC tournament, not the most exciting of the power tournaments, but I mean, at least it's finally here. So any tournament setting in college basketball is super exciting, no matter what league it is. So yeah, definitely ready for it.
Yeah. So we're going to jump right into it. We're going to just briefly talk through the first round matchups. These are obviously teams that finished at the bottom of the league. So not very exciting games. To say the least. But, we have Notre Dame, Pittsburgh, Virginia Tech, California, Florida State, and Syracuse. Cody, which of these matchups stands out most to you, at least from a viewer's perspective on Tuesday?
I mean, it's kind of hard to pick. I can pick my least appealing one probably would be Virginia Tech and Cal. It's just two teams that don't really excite me all that much. And it's just two not very fun styles of basketball, I guess. I think if you're looking for a game that's super up and down and exciting, I think with a bunch of offense can be played in the 80s, I'd say Florida State, Syracuse. I mean, it's not going to be the highest quality of basketball by any means. Two teams that love to play in transition, and there's some talented players in this game. Starling and Lampkin for Syracuse, and then on the other side, Jameer Watkins, and it could make for at least a fun matchup just for the viewer. No teams that are necessarily going to make like any sort of crazy run through this tournament. Although, I mean, we did see NC State run through this tournament last year and eventually get to the Final Four. And, shout out to Kevin Keats for that run, but I mean, he's no longer with the program. It's kind of crazy after you make a run to the Final Four the year before and then you get fired the next year, which, I mean, I think he kind of had it coming. It's probably the right move, but yeah, I'd say Florida State, Syracuse is the most fun matchup. The most high quality matchup, I'd probably say, is Notre Dame and Pitt.
Yeah. Like I said, not very exciting games. Pittsburgh really had a very underwhelming season. They were, even earlier in the year, they were playing all right. And then it felt like after they lost at North Carolina, they just went in the tank. Lost to them, I think, would have been early February, like February 8th, I think it was. And then they just went in the tank over the last month and now find themselves, playing as the 13 seed. They probably had high hopes for maybe even like sliding into that 4 seed earlier in the year. But now here they find themselves against Notre Dame, who had a thriller over the weekend. If you were watching it, you're kind of a basketball sicko, but 4 overtime game where they pulled it out at home.
Yeah, and they might still have tired legs from that game, even though they're going to get 2 full days off. I mean, yeah, it was a pretty wild game. Yeah, and then 4 overtimes with a Matalaco 3. But I mean, I'd say Pittsburgh. Obviously, I think you kind of have to say they have the most upside to make a little bit of a run here, but I think they've just shown over the last month and a half that they just don't really have it. I mean, I thought this team was a I thought they were a top 4 team in the league entering ACC play, and I think a lot of people thought the same thing, but just didn't work out for whatever reason. The defense was much worse than expected, at least worse than I expected. I thought it was going to be one of the better units in this league, and it just kind of fell apart. They dealt with injuries, but I still think that backcourt of Jalen Lowe and Ish Leggett could potentially get hot on a tournament run. And, when they can play back-to-back days and, catch a little bit of a rhythm, they could maybe have some NC State type upside and make a run. But although they're on the side of Duke, so once you get to the semis, probably running into a buzzsaw.
Yeah, I was gonna say I could see, like, for whatever reason, it feels like teams that kind of have less than expected regular season outcomes, sometimes even like when their talent's a little bit higher, they play up in the conference tournament. They somehow find a way to like piece it together. So, maybe they could find a little bit of magic here. It's not like they have a daunting path. I know UNC is playing better basketball right now, but that's a team that they beat at home and lost by 1 on the road. Had a chance to win it at the buzzer, and then Wake Forest, who we've seen them lose to just about anybody. So, they could definitely find themselves in that semi against Duke if they put it together a little bit.
For sure, yeah, and I think these teams with talent, they can kind of hit the reset button after a bad stretch, and like I said, if they put the pieces together, I think they can at least win a few games.
Yeah. In terms of potential matchups looking ahead, I think for me anyway, the matchup that I'd have my eye on is Clemson and Louisville. Definitely Clemson Duke if they can get back to that. Duke trying to seek revenge there against them. But I think Clemson Louisville is a game that has a lot of upside and kind of a measuring stick for both sides, because I've personally been much more on the Clemson train. I haven't really bought into the Louisville hype, but I know that they've had a very successful season, obviously.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to figure out like what to make of their runs, and what they both lost just 2 games in league play on the whole year. Like, obviously, I don't think they're as dominant of teams as they showed in ACC play, but yeah, I would tend to side on the Clemson side there. I do think they're the better overall team. I think they have more balance. I think they have probably the best player on the floor in Chase Hunter, and I think he could kind of will them to a win with his shooting ability. And I love the front court of Clemson as well. I think they probably have an edge on the glass there. And in past years, I think you could say that Duke and North Carolina would be the most exciting matchup, but we've seen it. Duke just went on the road and beat them by double digits, and it's just a really bad matchup for them. And Duke completely outclasses them, and they completely outclass pretty much every team in this conference, even though, they did go on the road and lose to Clemson. But overall, like, Duke is still just far and away the best team in this league. And that would be a fun rematch to watch. And hopefully it is close, but I do kind of see Duke sort of running through this tournament.
Yeah.
Just a spoiler.
Yeah. There is a double-digit seed. I think both of us actually, when we get to the brackets, I think both of us have them winning a couple of games. And I think that they even maybe could find themselves winning a few games depending on how things shake out. And that's Florida State. I think that they played all right yesterday against SMU, knocked them off at home in Leonard Hamilton's final home game as the coach of Florida State. But I think that they have the athletes, they have the length. Like, they're no great team by any stretch, but those things can be disruptive in a tournament setting. And if they can get hot at the right time over the next few days, we could be talking about them winning a few games and being really a surprise of this tournament.
Yeah, and I definitely like their matchup against Syracuse. They're obviously the better defensive team, and I think their offense can feel pretty comfortable against Syracuse, being able to play in transition. Syracuse is one of the worst transition defenses I've watched all season. They just don't have the speed or athleticism, especially in the front court. Like, obviously Lampkin kind of struggles to get up and down the floor in a fast-paced game, and they're not really concerned, but they don't really want to slow the game down at all. So I think that is advantage Florida State. And yeah, we just saw FSU beat SMU on their home floor. So, and I'm obviously not that high on SMU. I don't really think many people really believed in them. They haven't really beaten any sort of high quality competition all year. And I do think in a tournament setting where, the motivation's equal, I think they could get a little bit more exposed here.
Yeah. Now, Duke aside, is there a team whose path you really like?
I would probably say Clemson, just where they're at. And like if FSU ends up winning those two games, like I think Clemson is a very bad matchup for Florida State. Like they completely slow the game down and they control the glass. And those are two areas that Florida State is kind of weak in, especially on the defensive glass. So I do like their matchup there. And then obviously Louisville is a tough semifinal matchup, but I just think they're the better team overall. I think they're more well balanced. So I do think they have probably the best path to the championship game.
Yeah, I think so. Outside of Duke, obviously, because I think Duke is just gonna walk to it, which leads me to our predictions. I'll throw your predictions up here first, Cody. We'll just kind of talk through these. Our brackets are very similar. I think our only real difference was you have California winning in the first round and Notre Dame winning in the first round. Other than that, we have the same Final Four, same championship, same champion.
Yeah, and it's really hard to go bold in this league because it's super top heavy. There's 3 or 4 good teams. Like just the fact that Wake Forest gets the double bye in this league just goes to show what this league is this year. It's very bad for a power conference league. So, and yeah, in that first round matchup with Notre Dame, I just like them just for their coaching edge. I think Shrewsbury is definitely a much better coach than Capel, and they're starting to get a little more healthy. But if Pitt does win that game, I think they could potentially make some noise. They could have a favorable path there, like depending on if you believe in UNC, if you believe in their recent like offensive resurgence. I believe it to an extent, which is why I had them beating Wake Forest in that next round. I think the shooting is definitely improved, like with more Drake Powell, more Jalen Withers, they're both making more shots. Obviously, they weren't like fantastic in that Duke game, and they've been kind of, beating up on bad competition. But I do think you have to buy what their offense is doing to an extent, which is why I would favor them over Wake. But besides that, there's really no areas I really wanted to be bold in besides potentially if Pittsburgh won that game over Notre Dame, having them go fairly deep. I just don't think like all those teams in the first round just don't have a ton of upside.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I'm gonna pull my bracket up here for a second. Like I said, pretty much the same thing. Just have Pittsburgh winning that game against Notre Dame, and then Virginia Tech taking down Cal. And my angle really on that Virginia Tech game was really just, they've competed with some teams recently. They've hung in a little bit, other than UNC last week. They got kind of smoked, but hung around with Louisville. They've played some teams tougher, at least made them have to work. So I'm gonna just. It was really just kind of a coin flip game for me, 50-50 pick of like, all right, Virginia Tech has played a little bit better. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, but it doesn't really matter because I think that Stanford's going to beat whoever wins that game. Although Stanford did struggle a little bit this regular season with Cal, had a couple. I know they had at least one close game with them, so you never know. They've seen each other a lot over the years, dating back to the Pac-12. So I considered Louisville over Clemson, but I buy Clemson's just ability to control games too much. Like Ian Shefflin and Locken have been too good, and they've been super efficient all year shooting the ball, and they're all over the glass. So I really like Clemson in that game, but Chucky Hepburn, I guess, the way he's played this year, he could maybe lead them to a win there. But I'm going to side with Clemson, at least the more conservative pick. But same with me. I think that North Carolina wins a couple games, and ultimately runs into Duke again, part 3, and gets steamrolled again. So I just don't like we've talked about a bunch. It's just a terrible matchup, and I don't see them. I think last night was the best shot they had. Cooper Flagg had 3 fouls in the first half, had it to a 1-point game at halftime, actually got a 7-point lead in the second half, but ultimately, it's just a terrible matchup. And Duke feels like this Duke team feels so much different in that they can just turn the switch on in the snap of a finger, and turn up the pressure, really heat you up, and go on big runs. So this Duke team, to me, is much different than some of these other top Duke teams that they've had in the last 10 years, which is why ultimately I also have Duke winning my ACC championship pretty comfortably. I think this is unfortunately one of the more chalk conference tournaments that we have.
Yeah, and I don't think it would be the craziest thing in the world to say that Clemson could win this, obviously, but do we think that Duke is the best team in the country? Do we think they're better than Auburn at this point, even though with the Auburn recent slide, or are we don't really need to overreact to those two losses in the SEC?
Yeah, I don't buy I'm not worried about those Auburn losses. I'm not buying this slide. They lost. Obviously, they lost to both Bama and Florida at home, which is unusual. But to me, it felt like this week, Auburn, and we talked about it last week with the A&M game, Auburn didn't have the same level of intensity. It was a little bit more normal on Saturday, and Alabama played a great game. Just battled, made shots, but I think that Auburn's still fine. That those 2 losses, I'm not going to overreact to. They could very well just lock in this week and run through the gauntlet that is the SEC and win this tournament. So, no, I'm not going to get too wound up about it.
Yeah, I wouldn't overreact a ton either. Just, they had nothing to play for, really. They had already locked up the SEC title, and they're a 1 seed no matter what happens in the SEC tournament, and probably the number 1 overall seed. They could lose that first game to if they play Kentucky, and they'd be fine. But it's just the more and more I watch Duke, the more I think that they are the best team in the country. But I don't know if some of that is with the competition that they played throughout the entirety of league play, and the couple times that they've been challenged, I guess the one time that they were really challenged by Clemson, they ended up going down, and the defense got a bit leaky in that game, and they had to play some zone, and that didn't go extremely well. They did get dominated on the glass as well in that game. So I don't want to put a ton of stock into that one game, but I do think the gap is at least closing, and I wouldn't call anybody crazy for calling Duke the best team in the entire country right now.
Yeah, no, Duke looks. There's an argument, I think, for both teams, and I wouldn't call anybody wrong for saying either. They're both just that good, and I hope we get to see them play each other in March Madness. That would be awesome. But yeah. I don't know how. It's just so hard for both to get there.
Yeah, it would be in the national title game. These are the top 2 seeds most likely, and yeah, it would be a super fun game. That first game, I think Auburn was at a not an unfair disadvantage, but they were just coming back from Maui, winning that, and having to go basically straight there to Duke a week later. It was it's probably still kind of hungover from that stretch, and on a neutral floor, I would say Auburn would have been favored at that point, but now I think it'd basically be a pick at this point.
Yeah, I agree. So wrapping things up with the ACC, obviously we both have Duke winning it all in this conference tournament. So not going to be any Cinderella bid Steelers this year in the ACC. No NC State stories. But that leads me to my final question. How many teams in this conference do get their name called next Sunday night?
It seems like 3. I don't really see. I don't know if Carolina's going to get in. the resume just really isn't there for Carolina right now. It's what, one quad one win is, like, I know people are a little bit upset about that, like the fact that, I mean, they played a ton of quad one games, but they, you got to end up racking up some wins here at some point. But maybe, I mean, if they beat Duke in that semifinal game, I think they're probably in as an 11, maybe like the highest 10. I don't think they have to win it to get in. I just think they do have to beat Duke to get in. But besides that, there's no other teams really in this league that can get there. Like maybe SMU. I just, they would have to beat Clemson and Louisville, and then maybe you have a chance. But besides that, I think it's pretty much locked in at 3.
Yeah, I think it's 3 too. I wouldn't be surprised to see UNC slip up against Pittsburgh or Wake Forest if Pittsburgh happens to win that game. I think they'd be fine with Notre Dame, even though it did take a miracle for them to win it at Notre Dame this year. I think they'd be all right with the way they're playing right now. But I don't know, that like the Pittsburgh games have just been tough on UNC for whatever reason, and then Wake Forest beat them already. So I could see them slipping up against either of those teams. And if they lose either one of those, they can pack their bags and head straight to Cancun from the tournament. So I think three's the number: Duke, Clemson, Louisville, and that'll do it for the ACC this year.
Yeah, it's kind of sad that it's only going to be 3, but I mean, deservingly so. These teams did basically zero work in non-conference, and that's what happens. And then you just kind of, you're not able to rack up any sort of quality wins in league play when you don't do the work early in the season. It just goes to show like how important it is to, at least schedule like decently. And then when you have those games, you have to gain some ground and win a couple. Like they got slaughtered by the SEC in the SEC ACC challenge. What was it, like 16-2 or 14-2 or something like that? I don't even know. It was terrible. And obviously I don't think the leagues are that far apart to where it wouldn't be 14-2 every time, but still you need to win at more than 2 games in that competition. So yeah, they just didn't do enough this year.
Yeah, I agree. So NC fans probably not going to be too happy, but got to do more. So with that, that wraps up our ACC tournament preview. Look out for the game starting here on Tuesday with the first round with those 3 wonderful matchups. But other than that, we'll talk to you in the next tournament preview episode.